So I was just thinking I would run through our Wayback XML. We already know this is the basic Spring file that configures how Wayback operates, and we obviously are using an overlay as is described on Wiki. And if I have time, I'll maybe run into that just a little bit. And we'll start with this. So first thing we have, I haven't seen anyone else do this, but it's really quite helpful. So this little bit loads a properties file that is discovered in the file system. In this case, it's under the user home directory, which is pulled from Java. And it contains settings that are deployment specific. So our production environment, our test environment, our development environment can each have different CDX sources and all of that, and we'll see how it's wired in. Then I ran into a problem because I needed to configure things that just I needed, because we needed to integrate it with our front end. So I needed a placeholder for these arbitrary configuration elements. So they are actually used in the toolbar. So this is actually a rather simple class with these static methods, read and write, just so that it's available sort of globally. It's a hack, in other words, but I couldn't find a really elegant way of doing this. If someone has an elegant way, I was trying to load it into system properties or something, but that didn't seem to work. So this is adding one of these little classes. You can store your own thing, and because this is Spring, you can easily put whatever you want into there, really. We use a flat file for all of the arc and work locations, as many of you probably do. Then we use a CDX index, and here's one of the nice things. Actually, now that we have one that monitors a directory, I'll probably switch to using that rather than doing it. But what this does is, and I will just show, there's a relative. There we go. So this is the properties file we usually have. So for the CDX sources, so this is obviously for the Windows development environment. We have these CDX files, and there's a semicolon between each one of them. And what Spring does when you do this little magic in this line is that it splits on the semicolon and treats each one as a different value to be put into this variable. So it's just like enumerating them all here, except it's done outside of the Wayback XML, which means that just because I deploy a new version doesn't mean that I have to then go and tinker with this in the production environment. It just picks up from the properties file. So this is very helpful if you're doing something like this, having an overlay, and you want certain configurations to just stick for that server. It's just for that server. Having something like this is way helpful. And even if we go to using the version of the resource that monitors the directory rather than having to enumerate the files, which directory is obviously going to vary from environment to environment. So definitely recommend it. We use an exclusion file. This is just the standard exclusion file. As you may have noticed, we've simplified. So the default Wayback XML contains a lot of configuration that is commented out and whatnot. I do recommend just stripping it down and writing your own. You can always refer to the one in Wayback for the original values, but it just gets rid of all of the cruft that isn't actually being used in your environment. I'm going to talk about the archival replay in just a minute. Before I do that, I want to talk about the access points. Some of you are familiar with them. I know Gina is certainly, with other thousands of access points. So an access point is basically each one tends to be on a different context path. and they can have different collections, and they can present them in different ways. So we have two, and one is what we call the Wayback Access Point, which serves up typical content. So it's a replay access point. When you go and view something, so I had it up here. This is a typical thing. You can see the access point, and it does replay with our branded toolbar. But we also have another one a bit further down here, which is we call the Xml Access Point. And this one actually doesn't do replay at all. It will refuse to do replay. But it will do queries and return XML results. It won't do like fancy HTML. It will just reply the XML. And we've actually even gone a little bit further. So the XML capture results have been overwritten. So if I go here, and we have narrowed it down. You don't have to understand all of the code, but we've narrowed it down so the XML results actually just give us what our web front end needs. If you've never seen our web front end, I'm just going to show it off real quick. This is all built in PHP and interacts with Wayback via the XML interface. So it queries the XML access point, gets back sometimes a very, very big file. You can be up to 100,000. So this one isn't too big, but if I were to yeah, 29,673 hits, and growing fast. This is one of our we're doing the by RSS, so we're getting a hit every time the page changes. Oh, I don't know what's going to happen when there's a certain size at which this just breaks down. Only paging or something.
Just give PHP more RAM.
Yeah, something will give at some point. Crawling at this rate is all right. So this works pretty well. We like it. Most of the other things that are in the overlays, we have a bunch of other things, but mostly we're replacing things like the toolbar, which is already wired in the correct place. So you'll see, if you were to look at the OpenWayback project itself, you find most of these files. So we are basically shadowing them and putting in our own versions. The toolbar is the one we've changed the most. The reason we did this is because, and some of you probably found this out, branding it is very difficult. We talked about this during the last OpenWayback meeting. This is something we want to fix. You should be able to put in your own branding and make sure that localizations. I had a hell of a time just getting Icelandic, everything to be in Icelandic, and including dates and things like that. So I hacked away. I basically just gave up trying. You're supposed to be able to use a properties file, the Wayback UI properties, but it was just, it wasn't working. There were too many strings hard-coded. So I wound up, yeah, it's pretty similar to what's in Wayback, but there's enough changes. And because I had already forked it, I started tinkering with little bits and pieces. And it'll be painful when I have to redo all of this because the toolbar will be better. That's always the danger when you do this. You know, you go out of sync with the main code, and then you want to go back into sync, and it's painful. So I recommend. But for the most part, we decided, toolbar aside, like footers and headers, these are complete rewrites. And we just wanted our own look and feel, and it replaces most of what Wayback, and all of the search results things, we've completely suppressed it. That's all been shipped up to the PHP site. And if I have time, I'm just going to talk about the overlays.
Yep.
All right. I probably just 1 minute while I find it. So there's a pretty good, I say pretty good because I wrote it on the page here. But if you find a flaw with it, it is a wiki, so please edit. So it's quite a simple, you just created a simple Maven web app project and add the dependencies. So this was clearly written when beta 2 was the latest version. You should update that. And you need both. And they need to be like that. If you do it differently, things will break a bit. And then in the POMs plugin section, you do this. And this is the thing that actually makes it an overlay. You don't really need to understand why this works. You just need to know this is the way it works. And this means now that in your project, if you put in a file called the same thing in the same place as it is in the Wayback project, it will basically replace what's ever in the Wayback project. So I call it shadowing. You can, I don't know, or overlaying. So it just is a replacement, but it only affects, and this is important, it only affects the web app. So as Andy mentioned, Wayback is broken into this web app and this core. So core is the Java code, basically, and you're not able to overlay that, but you can put in new versions of classes, so if you want. But then you'll need to figure out how to wire them in. So that's much harder. But if you just want to replace the things that's in the web app, and this includes things like CSS, images, or probably more likely the JSP files, whatnot. You can do that. You just put them in the exact same location, and it will just basically be replaced. So when you do this little magic Maven package at the bottom of the screen, it will take the WAR file that is deployed to Maven Central, and it will take the code that you put in, and it will just sort of bake it over, and you get a new WAR file that is ready for deployment and has all of your stuff in it. So this is really the easiest way to manage, because that file can then just be deployed directly to Tomcat via its deployment mechanisms, and you can put it into your own internal repositories and do whatever you want with it. Do keep in mind that if you're using any of the command line tools, you will still need the regular OpenWayback distribution, which contains them. So this just generates the WAR file, not command line tool stuff. There's a sample overlay project here, which I'm not terribly fond of. I think it could be a little clearer. And if you use the most recent Eclipse, it does 90% of the work for you. Used to be you had to install a bunch of plugins, but nowadays it just kind of works. So yeah, this is what I talked about earlier. So, any questions? All right, thank you.
Comment, just in case it's of interest. We actually do a double overlay. So we have a first overlay from OpenWayback that adds all the major theming and styling, and then one of our deployments needs a few more tweaks. So that then we overlay the overlay for the small tweaks for a particular deployment. So if you have major, a number of different deployments, and you want to create a series of ones, you can kind of layer them to minimize the duplication.
That must mean that the first overlay really has to be put into a repository and managed properly.
Oh yeah, all of, I mean we do that with everything, right? So yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, you should have an internal Maven repository, whether you use Nexus or Artifactory. It is so worth it.
Actually, that's in the same Maven project, so it's okay.
Okay, so I mean, still.